This is the sound of the past being preserved. We're in the basement of OPB, visiting the archives.
Hi, my name is Mia Cooper Firm, and I'm the media archivist at Oregon Public Broadcasting.
It just so happens that Mia is fulfilling a request from our summer intern, Stephanie Hensley, for an upcoming Evergreen episode.
So I have a small format digibeta tape here. Actually, this is for the Oregon Experience story, Searching for York. We're digitizing actually like the raw footage interviews of the folks that were interviewed for that Oregon Experience story.
These tapes, along with footage stored on other various analog recording formats, live in a room Mia refers to as the stacks.
It's just a bunch of shelves. Some of them are rolling shelves. What we have in here is mostly media from our flagship shows. So that's Oregon Field Guide, Oregon Art Beat, and Oregon Experience.
For a nerd like me, walking into this room kind of makes me feel like Belle in Beauty and the Beast in that one scene where he shows her his library with the shelves of books that go all the way to the ceiling. You know the one.
I can't believe it. I've never seen so many books in all my life.
You like it?
It's wonderful.
One thing that I really like to point out about all of our field guide footage, and something that just sort of I feel like is kind of profound, is that all of this raw footage is like a document. I mean, it is a document of our environment in the region and in our climate. To me, that's really important.
From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Mia Cooper Firm helps us mine for audio gold so that we can bring you stories from Oregon's past and present. She is one of the unsung heroes whose hard work helps us make this podcast and helps all of our colleagues do what they do. We've invited some of the people who are working behind the scenes at OPB to join us on the mic. A little bit later, we'll hear from the OPB legal team about how they make sure public records are actually accessible to the public. But for now, let's get back to the OPB archives. So you mentioned all of our flagship shows, but OPB has shows that were on for a while, but are not on anymore. Do we have stuff down here from OPB shows that no longer exist?
Yes, yeah, we do. We do have most of our tapes from Front Street Weekly. And so Front Street Weekly was a news magazine show that usually aired every Friday, and it ran for 8 seasons from 1981 to 1989. But yeah, I love Front Street Weekly. Like, it captures the vibe and the stories of Portland in the 1980s, and it's been a really great source for a few stories actually that have been produced over the past couple of years to provide some sort of like texture or cultural reference in visual form. And then Oregon Considered was a radio program that began in 1991. So we, for NPR listeners, there's All Things Considered. And for a little while, we had Oregon Considered that was produced here in-house, kind of a news roundup. That's also been like a really great show to revisit or visit for the first time for me.
A lot of Mia's work involves digitizing audio and video content that only exists on physical media, like the tape she was working on for an upcoming Evergreen episode. She was excited to talk about how the digitization space recently got an upgrade. I asked how it's changed the way she and our media ops specialist do this important work.
We're still putting it together, but it is actually really exciting. Essentially, it's like we have a rack of tape decks, and they go directly into a digital recorder. And then from there, we have digital files that we can put into our media asset management system. And before, we had decks, and when we would want to record a tape or digitize a tape, it would go directly to an XD cam disc. And so it's kind of like you had to be like an octopus with 8 arms to be able to, like, I got to hit play over here and hit record over there. And it was kind of like an old school way of doing it.
What is some of the most interesting or unexpected stuff that you have discovered in our archives from years, decades of storytelling?
Some of the recent things that I've come across were, like, there was a story from the mid-1980s about a guy named Blazer Bill. You know, before Blaze the Cat, there was this guy, Blazer Bill, who revved up the audience at Trailblazer games.
So I'd say that I'm an orchestrator, a cheerleader, a facilitator, a public relations tool or element that says to the fan, you're here, you're paying a lot of money to come and see a sporting event, a professional sporting event, so why just sit there?
And that was a story that aired as part of a Front Street Weekly episode. Obviously, I'm like listening to the news and like seeing what's going on in our region, in our city. And at that time, like this was right when the playoffs were starting, and the Blazers were back in the playoffs after how many years? After a rough year too, right? And so sometimes I'll have, 5-10 minutes where I can be like, let's look to see if there's something fun that I can share with the rest of my colleagues. And so I came across a story about Blazer Bill that was produced by Todd Sonfleeth with audio from Lisa Callum. Lisa Callum still works with OPB as one of our senior video editors. Todd just retired, but is like one of the most prolific ace cinematographers that OPB has ever seen. And so that story is a really charming story that actually stands up really well, and folks decided it was good enough to put on YouTube, and so we posted that just as a sort of celebration for the Trailblazers.
Hey, defense! Defense! Talk to me! Defense! Defense!
One thing that was fun for me about that was that because the people who worked on it, are still around and I can still talk to them, they kind of shared some of the stories about, what they remember about shooting that. And the one thing that Lisa remembers is like, it's a heavy equipment and they're running up and down like the stadium stairs. But man, they got a good story and the sound is great too.
Real succinct, real loud, real crisp. Go, Blazers, just like that. 1, 2, 3. Go, Blazers! Very good.
Something that was kind of like surprising that I came across a few weeks ago was from an Earth Day special episode of the show Real Time. And they had these sort of interstitials in the program that was Ed Edmo, the tribal storyteller, reading some poetry. And so it's just like these poetry breaks in the middle of this program. And they're really beautiful, actually.
I like that mountain over there. I don't want to walk on my mountain. I don't want to dig holes in his face. I don't want the smoke to get in the way of the sunshine, because I do believe that mountain's like sunshine too, just like me. I don't want to hurt that mountain over there because that mountain has not hurt me. And besides, I don't want to get that mountain mad at me.
And then one thing that I've sort of had in my back pocket for a while was an early story, again from Front Street Weekly from the 1980s, about footbag.
Footbag, not hacky sack, footbag.
And since Oregon recently hosted the U.S. Footbag Open, we were able to reuse some of that footage.
And there you have it, a sport worthy of Oregon. Cheap, polite, nonviolent. It'll never make it, but it should.
One other thing I just wanted to mention was, I'm trying to get to know, what's in our radio archive a little bit better. When I first started reviewing what was in our Oregon Considered inventory, so again, Oregon Considered, a radio program from the early 90s. And one of the first episodes in January of 1991 was actually special coverage of when the first Gulf War began. And so people calling in about their experiences and their reactions and protests downtown and things like that. And there's part of it that's actually really heartbreaking to listen to. Moms worried about their sons going off to a war that they don't agree with and things like that.
I don't have a whole lot of hope, win or lose, because I don't think there's going to be a word win in this one any more than Vietnam or Korea or World War I. What it's going to do to this world, nobody's going to win.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So here at the Evergreen, we are often asking you to help us access audio from past Think Out Loud interviews or from OPB's TV shows that we want to make a podcast about. What kinds of requests do you get from other people in the building? Because you get many.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So sometimes it's really like a one-time use kind of thing where, I just need some B-roll of some pretty flowers on Mount Hood, something like that. Or I'm looking for sea stars, or I'm looking for sage-grouse. But then sometimes it's something that's much more involved. So I actually did a lot of work with the producers of the Oregon Experience program on Mulugeta Syrah. And so how that came about was looking for something else. And I came across a video of an interview with a young man, and he was saying some really terrible and hurtful things in this interview. And he wasn't named. He wasn't naming anybody when he was speaking in this interview. But at a moment, it became apparent to me that this was Ken Miski, and he was in prison because he had murdered Mulugeta Syrah. At that moment, I had known that this project was happening, that there was going to be a special on this murder. So I was able to let the rest of the producing team know. And so that started a bigger conversation about, what else is in the archive that we can use for this program.
I'm glad you brought that up because, we used some of that archival footage, and so that's cool to know about.
One thing that archivists deal with sometimes is the uncomfortable histories that are inside archives. And so it started me questioning, why do we have all these conversations with or about white supremacists, and we don't have conversations with the people who are affected by them, the victims. And so this was one of those moments where I had to take a step back just for my own mental health. I mean, the producers for that program, Nora and Dan, they know this way better than I do, but taking a step back so that you're not just listening to people say terrible racist things all day long. And that was something that I also, because I don't do the digitization myself, so if there was something like that that we needed to digitize, it's something that I would warn our media ops specialists about. If you happen to be listening to this while you're digitizing it, heads up, there's some really hateful things happening here. So if you don't want to listen to it, don't.
That's really smart. Thank you for kind of unpacking that a little bit. Okay. What is something that has surprised you in your job lately?
I just continually get surprised by it, but it's just the number of things that are missing from the archive. So OPB started broadcasting television in 1957, I think, but we don't really have any of those recordings. And we don't actually have a lot of recordings from our early days of radio. And part of that is because, one, radio and television are broadcast mediums, and so you have to do extra intentional steps to actually put that content onto some recording. And then the other part of it is that even if you say you did put it on 2-inch tape, video on 2-inch tape from the early days of television, because you could record over it again, you might, because that saves money. So there's just naturally across the board, across the history of television history, there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't exist anymore. We have program guides that go back to the 1960s, so we can see what was the weekly programming on television and radio. And you'll look at all of this programming and you'll think, man, I wish I could see that. But so much of it is missing. But at least we have some sort of information about it.
That's wild to think about. You would record things over old things because who needs this?
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah.
I have one last question. Because I actually think about it a lot, So I was let me get that on there. How do you think about your role as an archivist at a journalism organization, at a public media organization at this current time, a time when American history and how it is represented and how it is retold is under intense scrutiny by the government? Is that something that you think about?
Yeah, I definitely think about it. It just sort of makes me double down or really lean on the professional standards of preserving what we have and making sure that the information about it is accurate. because I feel like it's the information about things that is getting skewed a lot of the time. But really the thing that concerns me most is about how we're going to preserve all of the content that we're making today, not just at OPB, but across all media organizations. And how are we going to ensure that all of that content and information about it is verifiable and preserved in a way that preserves its authenticity as well. We're just making so much content for radio, for video, again, not just at OPB, but for media organizations across the U.S. Because news that's sort of like the evidence or a document of our time and our culture at a specific moment. And what are we losing when that kind of stuff goes away? Partly because it's under these large corporations who, if they don't see a way to profit off of it, they just want to offload it in some way.
Well, Mia, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about your job.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mia Cooper Firm is OPB's media archivist. Coming up after a break, we'll hear from two members of our in-house legal team about how they protect the public's right to access information from government agencies. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you like what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll brighten your Monday morning a little bit with something new and exciting to listen to each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB, that is Jen with 2 N's, and I'll keep you posted on what Team Evergreen is up to. And now, back to the show. In addition to our archivist, OPB has a legal team that works tirelessly behind the scenes to support the journalism we do. OPB is actually the only media organization in the state with an in-house legal team. We invited 2 of our in-house lawyers, Public Policy Counsel Nora Broker and Deputy General Counsel John Bile, into the studio to talk about what they do. Last year, OPB partnered with Lewis & Clark Law School on the Public Records and Government Transparency Project. I asked them to talk a little bit about what that is. Nora went first.
We have partnered with Lewis & Clark to teach a class where John and I, co-teach as adjunct faculty at Lewis & Clark, a cohort of students who are basically going through public records boot camp. And then we have several really excellent top-flight volunteer attorneys who will take on actual cases. Media who might need assistance in contesting a denial of records. Our students, in tandem with taking the class, they do the bulk of the legal work, kind of as we're training them up. And, as we said, in-house here, we have attorneys who've gotten really expert at how to do that. And so we are trying to provide that support to sort of level the playing field so that other members of the media, members of the general public are able to kind of go toe-to-toe and, successfully fight for access to records when they've been denied.
I know a couple of years ago, the city of Portland sued OPB and one of our reporters to block the release of some records related to Portland's Clean Energy Fund. John, can you please remind us what happened?
So the Portland's Clean Energy Fund is it imposes a surtax on the richest of the rich corporations. They have to make, I believe, $500 million in the city of Portland in gross sales before they're subject to the tax. And there's just, I believe, over 500 companies that fit the definition at the time that our reporter made the ask. It was a bit of a novel tax when it was adopted. It wasn't really covered by an exemption. And so when a reporter asked for a list of the companies and what they paid into the fund, that was really interesting in how the city responded. And so they first responded and said, no, we have a Portland City code that says that we don't have to give you these records. Well, I love the Oregon Public Record Law. I could get totally wonky about it and tell you the details of it. But one thing that for me is absolute is you can't have local public bodies adopting exemptions to the spirit of openness in the Oregon state law. And so that wasn't going to fly. And so we wrote back and said, that's not an Oregon public law exemption. Can you provide the exemption? And then they gave us another exemption. And I said, that exemption really doesn't fit. They can't meet the elements. And so we filed a petition. And it's a super long story, and I don't want to give you all the details because I'm not sure anybody besides the lawyers will really be all that interested in it. But at some point, the city realized, I suspect they realized that there was a chance they were going to lose this and they were going to be ordered to give up their records. And so they sent a letter to all 500 plus businesses and said, there's a chance that your tax information for the clean energy tax is going to be ordered released by the district attorney. And so the local business association, they filed a brief with the DA. It was 104 pages. It was a big firm brief, meticulously researched, and Nora and I answered it in, I think, 3 hours, and basically said they don't have the right to step into the shoes of the city. And so the decision comes out from the Multnomah County District Attorney, and the decision was OPB wins, sort of. What he said was, I'm going to order the list of companies disclosed, and I'm going to order the list of amounts disclosed, but I'm not going to allow you to link one to the other. And that will protect any of the privacy interests of the businesses. I wouldn't say I was completely happy with the result, but I thought it gave the information we needed to be able to report on the story on how the richest of the rich corporations were paying into this fund. And the reason the question was important, how much this money was, is because it raised twice as much as what anyone expected it to. And so it became a source of revenue, and there was a lot of curiosity about it, but it was this giant black box. We had no idea what went into the black box. We only knew what came out. And so Reporter was trying to link the revenues with the expenditures to make sure that everything was accounted for.
So, Nora, I know that you were very involved in this case as well. And the case actually led to a change in state law. How did that legislation change journalists' ability to access certain public records?
I just want to start by saying what a singular and remarkable kind of experience that whole chapter ended up being for our legal department. You're not usually engaging simultaneously on like multiple theaters across multiple branches of government. This dispute that had started with this really discrete public records request now had us contesting against not just the city, but a lot of broader state interests in both court and simultaneously the short session of the Oregon legislature. It's a little involved, and it's one of those things where sometimes you get something that might look like a loss but feels like a win. And that was kind of one of those situations. Initially, the proposal was to write an exemption directly into the public records law to kind of broadly cover a lot of different information that would be in tax holdings. And being in those rooms, I think we actually had pitched well, can we leave the public records all alone? Like, let's not write an exemption. How about if the problem is in tax law, why don't we look to the tax code? Why don't we fix it there? The bill that ended up passing ended up being a more minor amendment to the tax code itself to kind of cover the gaps a little bit for tax confidentiality when local governments are doing this stuff. That bill ultimately did have an impact on our litigation. It ended up having an impact on the disclosability of some of the information. But we were able to walk away from that feeling like we'd protected the Oregon Public Records Law and feeling really good about that.
Thank you for taking such a deep dive on this important case. I want to switch gears a little bit to a different case. You both worked on a case from several years ago that recently resolved involving Oregon Department of Corrections records. These were records containing information about Jeremy Christian, and he was the man who was convicted of fatally stabbing 2 people and injuring a third on a MAX train in 2017. John, what exactly happened with these records?
You have to imagine what happened on the MAX train. And the question was why? How did Jeremy Christian go from the man he was to the man he became? And as people were looking into that question, as our reporters were looking into that question, they found that he'd been previously incarcerated a decade ago. And he had apparently robbed a convenience store and then confronted the police and got shot. and he got convicted, and he served some time in the state penitentiary. And our reporter was looking for those records of what happened when he was in prison. And we were looking for those clues. But the Department of Corrections said you can't have those because the Multnomah County DA has asked for those records, and that means it's part of the investigatory exemption. That didn't sit well, in part because up until the DA's subpoena, those records had been available. Anyone could have gone and asked for them. They were public records, they were disclosable, and they had been for 15 years. And so we filed a petition. The petition was denied. We filed it with the AG because it's a state agency. I actually wrote a letter asking them to reconsider, telling them they got it wrong. They declined to do that. And so we ended up bringing suit on that. And we lost that at the trial court. But then we appealed it at the end of the case, and we won at the appellate level. So that was a huge win for us. We got a ruling at the trial court level that the entity that receives, the public body that receives the public records request, actually has to look at the records and do an analysis and determine whether each record on a record-by-record basis fits the elements of the exemption. That was huge because what public bodies would do would be like, oh, there's an investigation, and they would go searching for an investigation, and they'd find some other entity doing an investigation and say, nope, can't have the records. They can't do that anymore. And so this has opened up an awful lot of opportunity for our reporters that are investigating criminal cases.
I wanted to add something. It's a little bit of a tangent from the case itself, but the investigatory exemption is one of the biggest, most hot-button topics that routinely comes up. And being able to show up and kind of push back and sort of reset the foundation there was just really, really rewarding. And so the DOC case was on a little bit of different issues, but this investigatory exemption overall has kind of been one of the big projects I think that OPB Legal has sort of been taking on over the last couple of years, where you've seen these, it's been really rewarding to kind of get to these results that really sort of do actually push the line.
Well, thank you both so much for coming in and telling us more about this important work that you do for OPB and the public.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nora Broker is a public policy attorney with OPB, and John Bile is OPB's Deputy General Counsel. You can find all the great reporting that our journalists do with support from our legal team and our archivist at opb.org. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Nalene Silva engineered our interview with John Bile and Nora Broker. Layla Isbell mixed and mastered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Wing, and our summer intern, Stephanie Hensley. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And if you have a question for us, please reach out. You can email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.